All right, everyone, this is Eric over at Fusion Heat and Air, and we've got some cold weather coming up, so I thought I'd make a little video talking about a lot of the phone calls that we get, a lot of the considerations that you probably need to be considering whenever we're getting cold like this. I've got a little list here. You may see me glance up a little bit. I wanted to talk about some weather coming up. So we've got a couple decent days ahead of us. We got a high 52 and a high 57 and then 55 on Thursday. So Friday we dipped down. Our high is 43, low of 17. And Saturday we got a chance of snow with a high of 24, low of 10. And Sunday is going to be pretty similar. So I want to talk to you guys about your systems. There are really 2 or 3 different types of heat that you're heating with, and so we either have, generally in this area, most of them are heat pumps and furnaces. The heat pumps, they use basically the air conditioner in reverse. So I know it's crazy to think about, but when your air conditioner is pulling the heat out of the air, it's pushing it outside. That's what your condenser is doing. So that heat pump is just doing the exact same thing in the opposite direction, just running backwards. So you may think, hey, it's super cold, there's no heat to pump from outside. That's not necessarily true. Absolute cold is I don't know how many negative Fahrenheits, but it's really, really cold. So there's always a little bit of heat to pull. Plus it's using a law of physics with some pressure differences I won't get into. Moral of the story is a lot of people, when they hear heat pumps, they think, that's no good for us where we're at, here in Arkansas, it gets too cold. And I'm here to tell you, most of the people who have the mindset that heat pumps aren't very good, they're usually thinking about their grandpa's heat pumps. Like, these heat pumps these days are pretty impressive. We actually have heat pumps that are designed to run up in the north part of our country and even Canada without any auxiliary heat. So these things are just heat pumping. When they get too cold, too frosty, they'll run into defrost, they'll cut the air off inside, and then they'll keep going. So I'm just here to tell you, these newer heat pumps do a lot better. You got to get over the perception if you have the idea that heat pumps don't handle it. That's not the way they are. They've gotten more efficient and they're just getting a lot better. However, that heat pump is going to move whatever the inlet temperature is. So let's say it's 40 degrees outside. When it moves that air across the condenser outside, that's the heat pump at this point, the air coming out on the other side is going to be about 20 degrees less than the ambient temperature. So you can do the math. If it's pulling in 40, it's pushing out about 20-ish, depending on the charge and conditions and temperatures and different things. But you can see how, like, it can be 40 outside and you can still be accumulating ice on your heat pump. So we get a lot of text messages, a lot of phone calls. People send us pictures and be like, hey, this thing's not working right. And they'll send us a picture of some ice on the outdoor. The best rule of thumb I can give you for that is to tell you if it looks like a reasonable amount of ice, it's probably normal operation. People say, yeah, but it's above freezing. Well, that's the air being pulled. The heat being pulled, it's actually colder for that unit than it is outside. So you generally, I would say about an eighth to a quarter max of the ice buildup on the outdoor unit is what you're going to see. And if you see more than that, you're welcome to text us a picture and ask us if it looks normal. And also, if you have heat pumps that have overhangs directly above them, that's not the best for them. These things are designed to be outside. However, if these overhangs are just putting freezing water over the top of them, sometimes those fans will get built up. And I also want to make sure to clarify too, don't just build something around your unit. It has to move air. It has to breathe. You don't want that air recycling over something that you've got over the top of it. So if you were to do anything to shed water from hitting your heat pump off the side of your house, just please be very cognizant of the fact that those things need to breathe as much as they can. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those things do go into defrost regularly. When they do, they start burning the electric heat strips inside the resistive heat strips. Those things are burning roughly 2 to 3 times the amount of amps that it takes to just run your condenser or the heat pump outside. So there is definitely like a cost benefit to the heat pump. However, you start getting down into temperatures, there's no good rule of thumb on this. Depends on how old your unit is, depends on how clean it is, depends on how good the filter is, depends on the charge, depends on a lot of different things. But if I were to try to throw a number out there, I would tell you that these modern day heat pumps, they tend to run pretty good just in normal operation without switching over to emergency heat to around 20 to teens, degrees. Some people just automatically shut theirs off if it's below 30. I mean, that's up to you. If you want to spend the money on the electric bill, I'm going to tell you though that they're made to run that way, and if it's a newer one, it's doing okay. If you got an older heat pump and you want to cut it off at freezing, fine, cool. In fact, being a heat and air guy and having heat pumps in my house, I've paid attention to mine and how much they're switching back and forth. And I think one winter I noticed that when it got down to about single digits is when I felt like it was doing it too much and working too hard and switching. So I just put it over to emergency heat. So really depends on, obviously my system was probably more finely tuned, but just depends on the situation, your house, how much cold you're absorbing through the walls. So lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sounds on heat pumps before I move over to some thermostats and furnaces real quick. You're going to have all kinds of crazy sounds on heat pumps. People are always like, yeah, I hear this whooshing sound, and these things go into defrost. The outdoor unit will hum and buzz, and there's a crankcase heater that's running on those things. And so just know that most of the time, whatever you're hearing on a heat pump, it's probably normal. The big exception to that is that overhang that we talked about. If it gets ice accumulation on that fan blade, that can be very very bad. So those fan blades are very specific to the unit. Those are never something that we're just going to have in stock. They have to be an exact pitch, certain pitch. They're engineered for how many blades, how much pitch, how many RPMs, what's the voltage. So many different factors go into those things, and so you don't want to mess those fan blades up, because you can be kind of SOL up a creek without a paddle if those fan blades start getting damaged. So these things are designed to be outside, but they're not made to just crack through ice. So be cognizant if you hear repetitive, like a thump or something like that. And then lastly, I was going to tell you, these smart thermostats, guys, get a little bit trickier on putting them on emergency heat, but I'm not going to talk too much about this because there are a lot of resources online. You can generally go on YouTube and kind of Google, how do I switch over an Ecobee? How do I switch over a Nest into emergency heat? There are threshold settings where you can set them below a certain temperature that they'll just automatically go into that. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I do want to touch on the 90 plus furnaces. So we talked about when it starts getting this cold, down around 10 degrees. The 90 plus furnaces, specifically what I'm talking about is if your furnace has the flue, it's basically burning the gas, it's creating carbon monoxide that runs through a heat exchanger, and then it goes up through the flue and out of your house. Now, if that flue is metal, you just have a typical 80% furnace. The 90 pluses are just more efficient. Now, if they're more efficient, you're absorbing more heat and offsetting the temperature difference between whatever the ambient air temperature is or the cold air, and you're absorbing more of that heat. So that difference, just that it's generally somewhere around 12 to 16% more, is just enough to start creating condensation. So now that you've got a 90 plus furnace and you're starting to create condensation when it's really cold outside, you can have problems if that water doesn't have a good place to go. It's nice if you have a 90 plus furnace that can drain interior to an interior drain. Fort Smith City has recently put out a code where they do not want you draining into the sewage system. Can't say that I 100% agree with that. I understand their mindset and I'll respect that. We'll do as we're told to do, but for these 90 pluses, it's really your only safe bet. So if you had one that was already plumbed that way and it's running into an interior drain, you're doing much better. But if it runs outside, you got to keep in mind that the water that comes off of these furnaces, it's at least warm water. I'm not going to say it's hot water, but it's somewhat warm at least. And so as long as the water has somewhere to go, you're going to not tend to have it freeze up. If your pipe is running down the outside of your wall on the outside of your house, that's going to have a higher likelihood to freeze up. And what we recommend in those cases is heat tape. We do sell and install heat tape if you need it. It is something that you can buy at a hardware store, you can put on yourself, and it's not rocket science necessarily. I do recommend if you go buy the heat tape, they sell a plug thermostat essentially. They tend to be around like 20 to 30 bucks, and all that thing does is when you plug in that heat tape to the wall, it can sense if it's below freezing and it'll kick itself on and off. Because if it gets too cold in the middle of the night, you're not going to remember to plug it in. If you plug it in, forget to unplug it, it's going to be running resistive heating for, I've seen people who just had it running that way for a year or longer and didn't realize they left it plugged in. So I do recommend that. But please always practice safety. I mean, those things are UL. They have install instructions specifically, you want to follow those instructions and do them that way. So just wanted to explain a little bit about the difference between a 90 plus furnace, a regular one. Talk a little bit about the heat pumps. We got some cold weather. We're going to be using a lot of heat calls. So if anybody has any specific questions of that, anything you feel like I didn't cover, drop it in the comments, and I'll try to address those the best I can. But anyways, hope everybody's staying warm out there, guys.